Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Ephraim Chatter podcast. And on this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined once again by Rabbi Professor Ephraim Kanarfogel, who is the Ivry University Professor of Jewish History at Yeshiva University, and is a author of many books, as well as a frequent guest here on Ephraim Chatter. And I think many listeners would say not frequent enough. I want to mention, and as always with the episodes with Professor Kanarfogel, it's sponsored by Glock Plumbing. For all your service needs, big or small, in New Jersey, with a full service division, from boiler changeouts, main sewer line snakeouts, cammering main lines, to a simple faucet leak, Glock Plumbing Service Division has you covered. Give them a call, 732-523-1836, extension 1. This episode, we'll be discussing the Rokeach, Rabbi Elazar, not Eliezer, Elazar of Worms, the Rokeach. So thank you, Rabbi Professor Kanarfogel, for joining me once again.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And as I like to say, we will plumb the depths of our great Rishonim. And we're so thankful to Glock Plumbing. I have to go there someday. They're very wonderful sponsors, but maybe we can exchange.
Get the warehouse.
Some secrets here. They can teach me some things because I'm completely inept on all of these in Yonim. Yeah, so Rabbi Elazar Rokeach, Rabbi Elazar of Worms, is a subject we could speak a long time. We'll keep it within our normal gvalot, Mr. Chairman. You'll keep us in line. Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda was a very prolific, great Talmid Chacham, very prolific figure in many, many disciplines. Can't go through all of his bibliography. It's very, very vast. And he also did what we call shichtuvim. He rewrote, and he was just extremely prolific. If we were to ask the audience, we can't, but if we were to ask them, what do they know about Rabbi Elazar of Worms? Again, he's called Elazar of Worms. Worms is a very important city in the Rhineland, or he's known as Rabbi Elazar Rokeach because the major Sefer Halach of his that we have, there are a couple that we don't. We'll talk about that. It's called the Sefer Rokeach, right? Not the potion of something silly, but chas v'shalom, but a real rokeach, a real mixture. And by the way, you're right, Mr. Chairman. You must call him Elazar, not Eliezer, even though very often he'll be. People throw in Eliezer. That's in Chumash. They know that name. The gematria of Elazar and Rokeach spelled chaser is exactly equal, and that's very important. So if you call him Eliezer, you're off the gematria. And you spell Rokeach, Reish Vav Kuf Ches. Again, in modern Hebrew they do that. You're off. It's got to be Reish Kuf Ches. Remez, gematria, and so on were one of his calling cards, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. Rokeach, we don't have an exact date of birth and an exact time of Ptira, but nowadays we think he was nifter around the year 1230 of what we call the Common Era. Probably born somewhere around 1160. Again, these are approximate dates. Some think he may have passed away a few years later. And we should say that he lived in a very auspicious period. We've talked about this period before. Very auspicious period within Germany, within the Rhineland in particular. Between 1220 and 1230 or so, in that decade, 4 very big Rabbanei Harainus, great Talmidei Chachamim, call them Balei HaTosfos, German Balei HaTosfos, or figures of that type, were nifter. We've talked about some of them in the past. I'll just mention the list so we get a context. We'll put Elazar of Worms in there. In 1221, Reb Baruch ben Shmuel of Magensa, who was the Dayan Haroshi, the Av Bezdin of Mainz at that time, was nifter. After him, the Ravia, Rabbi Elazar ben Yoel Halevi, was nifter about 1225 in Cologne, Bonn, in that area, also the Rhineland. After him, around the year 1230, was nifter of Simcha Mishpira, Speyer. Again, the leading dayan of Shpira. And again, we have many Sifrei Halacha. Baruch of Mainz wrote something called Sefer HaChochmeh. We don't have it, except what the Mordechai quotes and others quote. But it was humongous. It's been lost. But again, we have these citations. We can almost reconstruct part of it, and some have tried. The Ravi, of course, Sefer Ravi is a tremendous German Sefer Halacha. Simcha Mishpira wrote the Sefer called Seder Olam, which is lost, except that it's cited in some Svarim and collections. Kupfer, published in Shuvot to Psakim, based on Bali in 692. Many pieces, but there are more. And the fourth, the last, also around the year 1230, was Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda of Worms. And in fact, once those 4 Chachamim are off the stage, so to speak, if we can say it that way, there really is no group, until Marami Rutenberg comes along, there is no group of very well-known Chachmei Ashkenaz at this time. Now, but if I say to you, Elazar of Worms, you'll probably say Sefer Rokeach. We'll talk about that. And you'll probably say, wait a minute, wasn't he connected with Rabbi Yehuda Chassid? And you're absolutely right. He's known both as a great Baal Halacha and as a member, as a Dayan, a leading Dayan in Germany at this time, but he's also known as a charter member, as one of the leading figures in Hasidei Ashkenaz. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid dies in 1217 in Regensburg. He lived for most of his life in Spira. Just to sort of get us into both things at the same time, by the way, the Beis Yosef cites the Sefer Rokeach not infrequently and with great, not only respect, but with great authority. In other words, this Rokeach was very big. He's very, very quiet. In fact, he was very modest. He often refers to himself in his piyutim, which we'll talk about other places, Elazar HaKotten. Sometimes they call himself Elazar HaAluv, the unfortunate, very, very self-effacing, very, very modest. That was within the guidelines of his Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. They never quite talked about their own names so much. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid calls himself Reach Bosem, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid ben Shmuel. Again, nicknames, Ramazim, all these ways of doing it. So just to say one word about the Sod tradition at the beginning, we'll say more later, and something else about his halacha. As far as the Sod tradition, we have a perush on the Siddur from the Rokeach that was published many years ago by Rav Hirschler. They just issued, again, our chairman knows this, he keeps track of all of this, Baruch Hashem. They just issued a new edition of this Perush where they fixed a lot of things. There are kisveyad, there are issues. And in that Perush, which goes through davening, you have Chol, Shabbos, and so on, and gives you all kinds of interesting sodos hatfila. And he says, I'm going to explain some of these things, not tremendous Torah Tasod, but again, as it relates to tefillah, he has a very interesting, I don't call it a story, it's an account about someone named Reb Abu Aharon of Baghdad, a Baghdadi, who ended up, Mishum Maisa Shahaya, interesting what that Maisa might have been, and he Valgad Arain in the east, and he ended up in Lombardy. Lombardy is not, the parking lot, the highway, or the guy who coached the Packers, right? Lombard, that's what we call it. Lombardy is northern Italy, that region of northern Italy, in a place called Lucca, Lucca. Lucca. And there he met this Abu Amr of Baghdad, met members of Mishpachas Kolonimus, the famous Kolonimides, right? The word Kolonimus is a Greek word, Kolonimus, it's really Shem Tov. It's the Ashkenazic version of Shem Tov, probably because they came originally from southern Italy and moved north. When did Jews come to southern Italy? Well, did you ever hear of the Churban Abayis, God forbid, when the Jews were brought to Rome? Who knows exactly? But in any case, Jews settled in northern Italy, very strong Kehillah. And this account that Rabbi Elazar of Worms mentions says that the Melech Karla, King Karl, brought the Kolonimus family from northern Italy to Magensa, to Mainz, to the Rhineland. And there in Mainz, they did very well. They had big families, and they really majored in three things: learning, Torah Hasod, and Piyut. And we know some of these figures, exactly when this happened, late 10th, early 11th. But says Rabbi Elazar of Worms, this is how the whole Ashkenazic community of the pre-Crusade period developed. And once they got to the Rhineland, Ashkenazic Jewry did very well, Mainz, Worms, others, except, unfortunately, the First Crusade in 1096, which a lot of people were lost. But he says, Rabbi Elazar, there was a whole chain of Torah's Hasod. And that chain included a number of people, including someone named Rabbi Elazar HaChazan, right, who gave over to Rabbi Shmuel HaChassid, who was the father of Yehuda HaChassid, who gave over to Elazar. And the truth is that his own father, right, Yehuda, Elazar ben Yehuda, Yehuda ben Kolonimus, his father was a Kolonimide too, from that family, right, was in Mainz. His father was the head dayan of Mainz, just before the sun. So and he himself, Rabbi Elazar, went to Worms. So we're talking about a very distinguished Torah family with a great chain of tradition, both in Nigla and in Nistar. And he says there, Echtov Sod HaTfilos, I'm going to tell you some sodos. He says, Laman Yeda Kol Adam, Ma Sod Bebrachos, Yechavein Libo, Lavod LaKodesh Baruch Hu B'yira V'ashrov. Again, and he lets a number of things, not deep sewed, but a number of sodos hatfila that are that he feels are worth spreading. So that's as far as his basic sod and his kolonimide background. But again, if Rabbi Elazar is the head dayan in Worms, his father was the head dayan in Mainz, these are the greatest batei din of the entire German period here. These are not small things at all. That's as far as his sod. As far as his halacha, sefer. Yes, please.
Let's jump in before halacha.
Good.
So a couple of things. First of all, the Siddur, as you mentioned, there is a new edition, but I should mention it's volume 1 of a projected 3, I think, and it's anywhere from $75 to $100 wherever you can get it. And it's not widely available in America. So, but it looks like a beautiful job. Just to mention what it is to those interested.
Yes, they had issues. Rav Hirschler, who was great before his time. Rav Hirschler was playing with this kisvei yad before anybody else was, but they were very hard to handle. So I think this new version is supposed to fix things up. And we're talking about Rav Hirschler working 60s, 70s, beyond, and so on. He's from Chicago, and Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, a great pioneer. But there's more work that has to be done. Good.
Now,
yes, that safe is going to cost a pretty penny. Yes. What else?
Now, about site. So, site, we should at least in brief discuss a little bit of the site, because this is something. So we haven't actually done this. Eventually, one day we'll do a podcast on German site. This is your book, Peering Through the Lattices. But and anyone wants to learn more about it, go buy that book and read that book. But just in brief, like, what are we talking about in site? Many people are familiar to some extent to site, but we're talking a specific strand of the German polytheistic site. It's not maybe what people are used to in the name of Kabbalah.
Right. So this is not the same as what they call Kabbalah, as follows, but not unrelated, as follows. Kabbalah, which one day we could talk about, really has as a central feature the Spheros, the aspects of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a mystical way, and what we can know, what we can't know, and so on. That's what you find in the Zohar. That's what you find in Sefer Bahir, which appear, Sefer Bahir and Zohar appear before and after Elazar. That's when they appear. I'm not talking about when they were written, but that's when they become known. The Ashkenazic version does not focus on those Sfirot, although there's some interesting research going on based on Kisvei Yad. Apparently, Rabbi Elazar had a version of that too. He had some kind of 10 Sfirot, but again, different form. The major fuel of Torah's Hasod of Ashkenaz, this is very complicated, is what's called Hechalot, the Hechalos. Hechalos, but Hechalot. This Hechalos is Torah's Hasod. Again, great arguments about when these works were written. Some suggest, again, names of Tanoim v'Amoroim, who's mentioned the Hechalos, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda ben Hakana, all the Tanoim who we know based on the Gemaras, right? Nu Sod, Arbor Shenich Nu Silapardes, the Gemara and Brach Nun Aleph that Rabbi Shmuel talked to Suriel. He's the one who went Macharei Pargod. We say it on the Asaruge Malchus. By the way, the whole Asaruge Malchus is related to Hechalos, right? That's not just Sod there. That's about, God forbid, the killing of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of the Tanoim of the whole period, before and after the Churban Abayis, but there's an awareness of Sod there as well. So the Hechalos are a very important base, along with Sefer Yetzirah is involved in early work of Torah's Hasod. So the Ashkenazic Torah's Hasod is on a different sort of a track, if you will. I'll just say, again, there's a lot of mechkar here too, which is at least worth mentioning. Gershom Sholem, who's the most famous scholar of this material and who put a lot of it out, he put out a lot of texts. He held there was what I call a northern tier and a southern tier. There's Torah's Hasod and Ashkenaz in the north, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, Rabbi Elazar of Worms. There are other names we could mention. I will actually mention one or two. And that's related to, but not in the same continuum as what you have in Provence and southern France, the Bahir, and in Spain, the Zohar, and so on and so forth. However, in the last 40, 50 years, since Sholem put out in the mid-20th and late 20th century, all this material, tremendous, unbelievable, a number of his students, Moshe Idel is the one to mention most prominently. Moshe Idel has shown, wait a second, there is Gisha, there is movement between north to south. You can see things in sod of Ashkenaz that makes its way to Provence, that makes its way to Spain, and back and forth, and so on and so forth. This also, by the way, so the readers don't get too nervous, this also can help explain the Ramban al HaTorah, and the Ramban in Shas knows plenty of material, not so much from Germany, but from France, northern France. And his sod that he has in his parish may also have some from the north, some from the south. There's interesting mixes here that could be a very interesting discussion. So I know I've gotten people, I think people are going to get seasick from this whole sending them all around all of Europe, but these are the Rishonim. And what's most important here, there were figures that we know only as what we would call either Mikubolim or Balei Sod, just like the Ramban in Spain, who was Gadol Hador Mamish, and whose contribution to Shas is beyond great, was the Gadol Hador in learning, and the Gadol Hador, and a Gadol Hador in Sod. That's the whole point. This Rabbi Elazar of Worms was a Gadol in Halacha, he was a Gadol in Nigle, he was a great Dayan, he was an Av Bezdin, but he was also involved in Ashkenazic Torah. And in that regard, he's a little different than his Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Now, the truth is, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid felt that kind great ideas and learning too, but we don't have as much that comes out. We should mention Rabbi Elazar of Worms. There are two other Sifrei Halacha, at least of his. So there have been others that have been published in Isser V'Heter, Hilchos Shchita, things like that, Yoredeya things. There were two other long svarim that somebody in Eretz Yisrael actually typed out. They can be found on our website. Now people are going to start writing. But anyway, very interesting editions. Very long Sifrei Halacha. Sefer Rokeach is a pretty, I don't mean thin, but it's not a very fat work. It's not as big as the Ravia. It's not as big as the other ones that I mentioned. It's pretty compact. We have much more from him, and one of these Svarim and Kisvei has in every area of what we call Shulchan Aruch later on, every area of halacha. We also have to remember that Rabbi Elazar of Worms, aside from being connected to Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, he learned by Rabbi Eliezer Mimetz. Rabbi Eliezer Mimetz, author of Sefer Yereim, is a Talmud of Rabbeinu Tam, who himself was in the Rhineland. So Rabbi Elazar of Worms knows about Balei HaTosfos also. He's not allergic, right? Sefer Chasidim, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid mentions Tosfos. Great arguments. They were the same as the Balei HaTosfos. They weren't the same. But what's the connection? Rabbi Elazar is much more, I don't want to say mainstream, but he's much more Ba'olamam Shel Balei HaTosfos, which is the title of the Hebrew translation of my book that they gave me. I love that title. They thought of it. Yashikayach to them. The Shita Mukubetzes, the Bava Kama, has 70, I counted, I went through them. Urbach found it, I didn't discover it, and others, 70 examples of Tosfos that Rabbi Elazar of Worms wrote based on Tosfos Harida Bava Kama. Frekt, Enfit, like a Baal HaTosfos. Say, wait a minute, so Hasidei Ashkenaz weren't allergic to the Baal HaTosfos. Right. And some scholars think they were allergic. They did Chasidus and they did Lamdas. No. Rabbi Elazar of Worms does both. Gam Bizelo, and that's part of his greatness. Gam Bizelo hiniach et yadav. Rabbi Elazar of Worms is one of the signatories on the Takano Shum in the 1220s. So he's a Gadol Hador in learning, and he's a Gadol Hador in Sod. And he's got Chaverim who do some of what he does in Sod. Just to mention, there's a Perush al HaTorah, you know, and it's worth telling the listeners, there is a Perush al HaTorah that's attributed to Rabbi Elazar of Worms, that Reb Chaim Kanievsky, that others were involved with. I want to say this very carefully, and I, it's probable that the Perush, most of that Perush, is either a Talmud of Rabbi Elazar or another Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. So it's definitely in that family. And again, if only we had Reb Chaim could come explain to us what exactly going on there. What do you want to say, Mr. Pirush?
Yeah, that Pirush, so I think Julius Klugman was behind it.
Klugman,
and Reb Chaim was the editor. So Reb Chaim was like, yes, you look at the Hagoyes, that you can still buy in the store. Reb Chaim Kanievsky was he edited it from the Ksav Yad. Yeah, he did the work.
Right,
okay,
so I always...
the Ksav Yad, but he did the work on the Pirush.
Right, so like everybody else, if we could get back to these Gedolim, I have a few questions I want to ask about to Reb Chaim, and he'd probably tell me I got it wrong, I don't know. But there's an interesting problem here. There's another Perush that's related that I think Klugman was also involved in. It's the same kind of a series. Rabbi Ephraim ben Shimshon al HaTorah. Now these are B'derech Remez V'Sod. Right? Rabbi Ephraim ben Shimshon.
That's the Perush that everyone knows with the werewolf shtickle and Binyamin and
the werewolf. And the other thing, correct, and the other thing people should know in that Perush, and it's fantastic because the Rambam was not cited so much in Ashkenaz, not in Tosfos, it depends, the Smag. He says they are not in V'zos HaBracha. He says that I think it could be Heintig Gesedra. It's Parshas Truma. By the menorah, he says that Gedolei Torah, Remez ben HaTorah Minayin. You should have Ramazim in Chumash for alle Gedolei Torah. And he gives as an example the Rambam. Where is the Rambam Merumos in the Torah? The last two psukim. State in Zos HaBracha, the very, very end of the Torah, Ulchol Hayad HaChazakah, Ulchol HaMorah, with an Aleph, HaGadol, right, the great, right? Asher Asasham Mitzrayim, right? And who's it about? Moshe Rabbeinu. So who's the Yad HaChazakah? Does it a Mishnah Turf in the Rambam? Yes? What's the Morah HaGadol? So I'll take Morah with an Aleph, Morah Nevuchim. Remez LeRambam in a Torah Menayim. This is this from Ephraim and Shimshon. It's unbelievable. So you're getting a taste there of the Remez part, and again, a lot of there's sod material there. We don't know much of this from Ephraim ben Shimshon. In fact, but that he was chaver of Rabbi Elazar of Worms. His other chaver, and this will help us finish this part of our discussion about sod and Ashkenaz that we're just tempting the readers, some of the listeners, some of whom may know much more about this, and I'm not telling everything now, but please don't tell me I'm not giving you the whole story. There's this Moshe Idel found over the last 30 years, a gewaltige genius. Boy, it knows Kisveyat, top and bottom, back and forth. He discovered, or he uncovered a person who we knew, somebody named Reb Nehemiah Hanovi, Reb Trustlein Hanovi. Trustlein is, in sort of Yiddish, in German, Nehemiah, Menachem, Nehemiah. Reb Trustlein Hanovi of Erfurt, Mizeh. So Idel has shown that this Reb Nehemiah Hanovi was the most prolific Ashkenazic Baal Sod at the time of Rokeach, a little bit later, first part of the 13th century, and almost everything that's about Ashkenazic Sod that we can't blame on Rabbi Yehuda Chosid or on Rabbi Elazar of Worms should be blamed on him. This Ephraim ben Shimshon was his chaver too. So there's an awful lot going on here. The readers are calling in already. Wait, let me turn it off. Very nice. I must say, by the way, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. People send emails. I'm not encouraging, but people, and I learn things. I get questions and I have to find answers, and I have to learn many things because I don't know that much, but I'm trying. So this Torah's Hasod of Ashkenaz is a big story, and it deserves we know the people, the leaders, but much more than we said now. By the way, there are Sfarim that Rabbi Elazar of Worms wrote in Sod, Chochmas HaNefesh, what's called, others, and he really has, like the Ramban, this is very fancy, 2 tracks. He has very deep Sod and sort of calmer Sod for the the Olam. You have in Shulchan Aruch the Leil Hachitum, right, where the Ramah mentions that he doesn't seem to be so supportive, right? The Leil Hachitum on Hoshana Rabbah Nacht, right? You go and you see the shadow of the person that sail, right, in the Or Halavana, and that has to do with his, Gemar Din and so on. That's coming from Elazar of Worms, and that's just one of many, many things. We'll talk at the end. I want to talk at the end. We'll get out of this for now. I want to talk at the end about what I'll call his sort of less deep Torah Hasod, what's called Sod Yichud Hashem. A lot of his Sfarim and Sod, he wrote tremendous numbers of things. A lot of it has to do with the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak. Right? So not like the Rambam, that it's kind of, when a Novi sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he sees something in his mind, he's really seeing nothing. There's the notion of Kavod HaNivra, Kavod HaNe'etzal, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu produced some kind of being that came from him, Koach HaNivra, Koach HaNe'etzal, Kavod HaNivra, Kavod HaNe'etzal, and that's what the Nevi'im saw. Anim Zmiris, which we think was written by either by Rabbi Yehuda Chassid or Rabbi Shmuel Chassid. What's what the Taltalim Shecho wrote? That's that kavod. Don't take it literally. That's that kavod, right? So he has all kinds of works about this to try to help people understand it's the old problem, divine immanence and divine transcendence. We want HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be near us, but he can't be near us. So the Rambam worked, physically, he can't. The Rambam worked it out one way. The Chassidi Ashkenaz following Reb Sadia Gaon worked it out a different way. So Gam Mizelo Hinechad Yav, and I'll talk at the end about how this type of sod, this sort of calm sod, the Ramban actually quoted this to solve some problems. So we'll talk about that perhaps at the very, very end. But that's at least a leck of some of the sod. And again, tremendous remozim, the Baal HaTurim, that people know. There are many things the Baal HaTurim says are found in the Perushim of Rabbi Elazar Vorms. Not that he's taking it's bin b'mino. That's where it starts. It goes from Rabbi Yehuda Chassid to Rabbi Elazar Vorms to Marami Rutenberg to the Baal HaTurim. There's a whole Hishtalshalut here. That's the Hishtalshalut of Remes, right? Rashi Tevos, Sofei Tevos, all kinds of remarkable things. In any case, let's talk a little bit about Sefer Rokeach. Let me mention it. We'll try to go further here. Questions, Mr. Chairman? Can we go further?
I just was going to throw in. So for more on this, I'll link in the show notes. Your book, Peering Through the Lattices, Mystical, Magical, and Pietistic Dimensions in the Tosafos Period. That's, I think you'll get in English. Obviously, there's, I think, Dan has a
Hebrew
book.
Version.
Hebrew,
there's also Hebrew
version. Hebrew version is the Joseph Dan has Hebrew version. There's a couple other books. So just to mention that. And just, so the thing and we'll do another podcast on Amir Hashem about Soid, just more. But the thing, so when we talk about Elazar Rokeach, we say Abal Soid, he's not a Makubal. So when we talk about it, don't say Makubal.
No, it's Soid Ashkenaz. You have to say it very clinically and very carefully. Again, listen, some great Baal Soid will come and tell me this goes with that. I'll believe them 100%. But that's a way to organize it where I don't think we're running against anything, God forbid, and we can understand it ourselves. By the way, the other thing that comes along with Soid in Rabbi Elazar Vorms is what we'll call Tikunei Tshuva, Chasidus, Zeya Frum. And not just Frum, Stam Frum, real Chasidus. In other words, going the extra mile, including what are called Tikunei Tshuva, right? There are 4 types of Tikunei Tshuva. That's in the Sefer Halacha. In the introduction to Sefer Rokeach, you'll see Hilchos Chasidus, Hilchos Tikunei Tshuva. It sounds like a little bit the beginning of Mishnah Torah, right? You have, Yesodei HaTorah, you have Deos, you have Hilchos Tshuva. It's interesting whether that was the model or not, but that's the idea. In other words, along with the halacha, there has to be not just machshava, but some type of, Torah, you're also Kod Molachach Maso. And these Tikunei Tshuva are very strong. I don't know that the Rambam, I don't want to speak for him, but I'm not sure he would like that so much, the Rambam, because it involves very strong things, sitting in the ice in the winter and all kinds of tests. There are those people who go on Coney Island, they go in the middle of the winter and they sit in the ice. The polar bears, they call them. They meant it l'tshuva, right? If you're such a person, you push yourself in that way, and you can take a look there. We also have a whole bunch of kuntresim, one that's called Yorech Chatoim, right? How to get rid of your chatoim that Rabbi Elazar Vorms wrote, which appears, by the way, among other places, in the Kolbo and the Orchos Chaim. In other words, it's put into Sifrei Halacha, so it's not inimical. It's not, again, like the Rambam did. The Tshuva goes with Hilchos Tshuva goes with Hilchos Shabbos. It's not a completely different operation. Right. And I mentioned, again, we have Tosas from him. We have a Perush to Yerushalmi Maseches Shkolim that other Rishonim cite. So we've got tremendous straight learning. Again, if he's a Talmud of Rabbi Elazar, I'll give you an example in a second. We have some straight halacha here. Just sounds like a Baal HaTosaf. But let me just say about the Sefer Rokeach. Sefer Rokeach is a wonderful, calm Sefer. Halacha, Beis Yosef quotes it. But let me tell you, he also puts in some very interesting other things. For example, about Minhagim and about other things that he was interested in. So, for example, if you look there in Hilchos Shavuos, right? Hilchos Shavuos doesn't talk about the blintzes. He talks about a whole tekes for the beginning of the educational process, Tchilas HaChinuch. And people have heard of this, right? You give the boy, you cover him, it's like he's going to Har Sinai, and you bring him to the shul, and you put either a tablet or a cake, and you write on it words and eggs, and you put on honey and elect. The schools do it, little Tinokosh Beis Rabban do it. He didn't invent this, but this came out in early Ashkenaz, and he supports this very much. And you read the Aleph Beis forwards, backwards, which, by the way, is also not unrelated to sod issues. And at the end, he says, and you eat the peeled egg, and you eat the cake, right? You eat these things, which again, it's not Kiddush. This is Rabbi Elazar Kalir. These are aspects that relate to Torah's Hasod as well. And if you do that, he says at the end, all of this is tofu lepsichas halev. Pesichas halev, with a sof. What means pesichas halev? Doesn't mean, God forbid, a heart transplant, open heart surgery. It means to have a full understanding of Torah and or a full retention. Again, if you do these hanhagos, you still have to learn, but you will get a big help min hashamayim in these things. That's sitting right in his Sefer Rokeach. So it's not just halacha, it's also hashkafa, and it's also things that relate to our halachic actions. Just one other example, if I may. He has in Minhagim by a chuppah, he talks about, again, it's mostly what I'll call Orachayim and Yeredeya issues, but he has not really Choshen Mishpat there, but he has some Even HaEzer issues. He talks about why the Chassid and Kala fast on the day of the chuppah. So, of course, it's L'tshuva and so on and so forth. But he says that's to show mipnei shemitzvah chaviv aleim kederach sha'osim chasidim harishon. He says he found an Agada, a medrash, and again his sources are unbelievable. That what the Chassid and Kala fast, any mitzvah that's very dear to them, right? He says it's like the Chasidim Harishonim Shahayu Misanim al Mitzvah Chaviva could go lulav ushar devarim, right? The Gemara says that the Chasidim Harishonim paraded up and down all day on Sukkot with the lulav and the esrog. The mitzvah was so dear to them; they were araying a ton in the mitzvah. They didn't eat. They just went with it. He says that's why Chassid and Kala fast. Mishim Chavivas HaMitzvah. Again, it's a medrash. I don't know if we have it, but so he's got awareness. And he says, my point is, he's bringing together halacha, hashkafa, sod, all kinds of things, even in his regular sefer halacha. Let me give you an example, by the way, of what I'll call his deeper halacha. There's a very interesting, there's a machlokes about in Hilchas Avodah Zarah, about Jews doing business with what I'll call church implements, right? Jews did business with all kinds of items. It has to do with the beginning sugya of Masach Avodah Zarah, other places, Tosfos and other discussions. So they argue about, what about candles? The church has candles. So can a Jew buy candles from a non-Jew or sell? Again, is that somehow a Bizrayu Avodah Zarah? So many of the Balei HaTosfos were makil because they said the candles are not part of the service, right? They're not worshiping the candles. They put on the lights, but they're not worshiping the candles. And they even said if the Galach turns off the candles, if he puts them out, that's a kind of a bittul, and all kinds of heterim, all kinds of kulas. So there was a sheet that Rabbi Elazar Mimetz wanted to say, no, the candles are also part of the avoda. Why? And the Gemara has to be an avoda ke'en penim. What's usher is part of the real service, like the mizbeach. Ke'en penim. It's part of the main avodah zarah. If it's something which is really, so it's not, by the way, animals either, because they didn't shecht animals. That wasn't part of it. Whatever they did in the main part of the church, that's what the avodah is. Things that do that, you can't really get involved in too close to the yemei avodah zarah and so on. That's what the Balei HaTosfos and other Rishonim discuss. So the question is, what about the candles? So again, the idea is these are sort of accompanying, right? Rabbi Elazar Mimetz wanted to say no. They're also avodas panim. Why? Last time we checked, it's Heintiges Hedris. There was a menorah in the Mishkan in the Beis Hamikdash. So there are candles. Now, truth is, when you do the avoda, none of the avoda that we did or do relates to the candles. That's a separate thing to light the candles, balos chasaneros and so on. But he wanted an aser. And Rabbi Elazar, his student, Rabbi Elazar Miworm, said, no, that he thinks that, not that his Rabbi is wrong, but like all Balei HaTosfos, they argued about it. He took the position of the Ri, another student related to him, Lakula. So my point is, you'd think he should be a very big machmir and a very big German, supporter. No, he calls it where he sees it. So this is stuff in Kisvayat. This is stuff that's in that big Sefer Halacha of his, where he says, my Rebbe, Rabbi Elazar Mimetz, wanted to go against the Ri on this, and I think the Ri is right. So again, just to give you a little leck of his great awareness in Halacha as well. It's very interesting because he says that he has no Talmidim. He says he has no Talmidim in Sod, right? Which is a little bit unclear because he's in Sod Dafka, he does seem to have had Talmidim there. There are people who put out some interesting Kisvayat. In Nigla, it's not so clear. It's not so clear who his Talmidim were. The author of the Arugas Habosim, Avram Barabazriel of Bohemia, right? Learned by Rabbi Elazar of Worms. The author of what's called Sefer HaSufos, which has never been published. Somebody, I mentioned this other podcast, somebody was supposed to have published this gigantic Sefer Halacha. He says he's a Talmud of the Ravia and the Rokeach. We needed it yesterday. If any listeners out there I think there's somebody now in Germany. I don't know. Where I go schnurring for people to do this work. I've looked at it. It's a beautiful caveat. Anyway, so that's another Talmud. Now, by the way, Dayanim didn't have so many Talmidim. If you're a Dayan, you're not giving Shurim all day necessarily. Only Reb Simcha Mishpir, really, amongst those names, had a lot of Talmidim. But anyway, the Or Zarua mentions Rabbi Elazar of Worms as his Rebbe, but I think he's more his Rebbe bin Haktavim. In other words, he had his material. The Or Zarua did learn. We talked about him at the time. He learned with Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. So again, who his followers were and so on is not always completely clear. He had a very important uncle, Rabbi Elazar of Worms. His uncle or his great uncle was Rabbi Menachem ben Yaakov of Worms, who died in 1203, who was the prior Av Bezdin of the court of Worms. Again, like Elazar, we'll talk about this soon, a very prolific Paitan. Right, his matzeva he was a Tana, he was a Paitan, he has a fantastic matzeva. And again, the Sefer Asufos, by the way, has this tekes for Tchilas Halimud. It has, what do you call it, Rabbi Nachum of Worms, Rabbi Elazar of Worms, Rabbi Nachum of Worms is also mentioned in Sefer Asufos. And also, by the way, there are what we call Sifrei Zichronos, Memorbisher, for Yizkar, of Worms. Rabbi Nachem, the uncle or the great uncle, and Rabbi Elazar are mentioned as the Rabbanei Ha'ir for decades, for centuries. They're the two greatest Rabbanim of Worms. Just an interesting perush. Again, so that's Rabbi Elazar as a Baal Sod a little bit. That's Rabbi Elazar as a Baal Halacha a little bit, as a kind of a Baal HaTosfos too, as a Baal Remez. We have other Perushim of his, and we keep finding one. Somebody now in Eretz Yisrael is working on one from a Vatican Ksav Yad, which I mentioned in my book that came out in 2013, the original intellectual history book. And I mentioned in a footnote, this fellow is working on it. He's still working on it, but he's almost done. He's getting there. Of a different type of a parish. Let me mention some other examples here. There's a parish on the Pasuk in Yisro, when Yisro says to Moshe, do it my way, divide up the Dayanim, Yachal Amod, you'll be able to hold, you'll be able to stand in, right? So there's a perush. What do you mean you can stand? Yachal Amod. Yes, it means you'll be able to manage. So he says, no, you'll be able to stand up when you want and go learn. In other words, Yachal Amod, you'll be able to say, okay, you, Sarei Asaros and Mayos, you handle all the cases and I got to go learn. Yid Medaf learning, or Shiva Medaf learning too. And that's right, because otherwise you'll never learn day and night. It'll be Bittul Torah. That's attributed to Rabbi Elazar of Worms, or to that Rabbeinu Ephraim. So again, it's not just Remez. There are these interesting things. Also, by the way, in his Perish al-Hasider, there's a fantastic piece. I saw it, and Urbach actually has it in his introductory volume to the Arugas HaPosem. I saw it in Paris 772, but it's in the Kisvei Yad, that Rabbi Elazar of Worms says that a Talmud Chacham has to be a baki not only in Chumash, but also in Mikra, Vasa Mikra, Nevi'im Ksuvim, in addition to Mishnah Gemara. He says there, if a Talmud Chacham doesn't know Nach cold, he's going to miss things in the Gemara. That's what he says. So this Rabbi Elazar of Worms was into many different things. We also have, there's a Kovetz, there's a collection of Bali Atos Latar called Paneach Rosa. By the way, don't check, but you could check. Paneach and Rosa add up to the same number, and that's the number Yitzchak. Anyway, and in that introduction, it's not in the printed edition, but it's in Kisvei Yad, he says he's going to quote Rabbi Yaakov of Orleans, the Yosef Bechor Shor, right, the French Balei Atosis, the Sefer Hagan, also from France, and then Pshatim, we got Gematrios from Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, and Pratim, details from Rabbi Elazar. That's Rabbi Elazar of Worms. So again, his Perushim were known. And just to give you a different type of a Perush of his, just to show you there's, these things can go around and around. I actually mentioned it in that intellectual history book. I put it in that was just translated to Hebrew, so it's coming out again. That I found in the Moshe Zekanim collection all kinds of perushim of Rabbi Elazar of Worms that are not found anywhere else. I would call it, I would say almost b'derech musar, b'derech ruchnius, not sod, not remez. For example, the pasuk Halahu avicha kanecha, the end of the Torah. He's your father who bought you. He owns you. So Rabbi Elazar of Worms, there it's spelled Eliezer. It's not right. Rabbi Elazar of Worms, those things happen. They're so from copy. What does that mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu bought the Bnei Yisrael. He owns them. He's like the president of the team. What does that mean, so to speak? See, he says that every ummah had a sar, and really originally, who was the saro shel Yisrael? Michael. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Michael, Tut me'atoive, sell me the Bnei Yisrael. I want to be, right, Tamidei Hashem Bo. I want to be in charge myself. And he says to Michael, I'll make you a sar up here in Shamayim, right? Michael is like Aaron. There's a whole interesting remez to that too. And that's what happened. And that's the pshat, Hu avicha kanecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bought you from Sarchem Michael, as Michael is called in Sefer Daniel. So again, this is a very kind of a... It's not exactly a chasidus, it's not exactly a remez, but it's really everything put together. It's a very, very insightful kind of a perush. Also from him. Again, who knows what else we don't know about him. Okay. I mentioned the other works in Isser Heter. I mentioned him arguing with Rabbi Elazar, with Eliezer Mimetz's teacher. Interesting, by the way, both Rabbi Elazar Rokeach and his Rabbi Yehuda Chassid were, quote-unquote, impressed with the fact that the Goyim were very quiet in their places of prayer, and the Jews were not so quiet. It's fascinating, the smak in Siman Yud Aleph. You have to take a look. The smak is French through and through, right? Yitzchak ben Yosef of Corbeil, French through and through. Learned in Evreux, right? French. Paris. He says there, he opens his Siman Yud Aleph, which is Hilchas Tefillah, with Rabbi Elazar of Worms, Kavana in the first three brachas, Perish Hamilos, and he quotes him by name. He also quoted Rabbi Yehuda Chassid in Siman Gimel Dalet on Kiddush Hashem. And at the end of that Siman, he quotes not by name a piece that appears in Sefer Hasidim. We have Elazar Mimetz too, Elazar Mimetz, that the non-Jews were very quiet, beveis either tarbusam, their place where they did their thing, or beis tarfusam, their disgusting place, right? They were very quiet. And we have to be quiet too. And they even go further and say, if you see, God forbid, that a shul was destroyed, it means that people were talking in it. And if you see, God forbid, that a church was built on that spot, and that happened in the Middle Ages in Ashkenaz not infrequently, that means they were really talking, God forbid. So you have this, again, it's a very strict approach, but it's a lichtig strict approach. It's, we know Azar Talmidei Chachamim Tzadikim, who are very tough on themselves and tough on others, but it's also with deep learning. So that should bring us to his kinos, his piyutim. Really, Rabbi Elazar of Worms is a exceptionally prolific paitan. We have, by the way, coming up almost in Yonah Diyoma, Droshel Pesach. Tens of pages. Now, did he give these drushes publicly in Shabbos by Mincha, or is this meaning this is what he heard of it? My friend Simcha Manuel and Eretz published many of these kind of texts, published a number of years ago. He tells you the new edition coming out, and it was published 20 years ago. Things that we do have from him, things that we don't have, all about Hilchas Hagolas Kalim, all about Hilchas Chametz U'Matzah, all about Hilchas Matzah, all about everything. Drashas HaRokeach, which he apparently did on the side. Piyutim, extremely prolific. We have Paitanim, Rabbi Ephraim of Regensburg, who we have things from him from Erev Rosh Hashanah that we say. The Ra'avon, we have, Rabbi Ephraim wrote 40 Piyutim, 35, 40. The Ra'avon, 30. Rabbeinu Tam wrote 25, including Yitziv Pisgam, right, in France. From Elazar Mivorms, we have, at last count, about 52. That's far and away the most. And these Piyutim are extremely artistic and extremely content-laden. I can't, go through every single one with you. I'll just mention, for example, many of them are about, and they were published, by the way, Mr. Chim, and you know this, I think, by the way, a fellow named Meizelish, Yitzchak Meizelish. I hope he's still with us, a fine Yid from Yerushalayim, he published the Piyutim of Rabbeinu Tam, based on Kisvei Yad. He did a terrific job. And he has there all these piyutim of the different types, many of them are what I would call for Yom Tzara, right? They're for Gzeros, they're for they're Slichos, they're for Kinos, but quite a number are also for the Chagim, for Yomim Tovim, and so on. Just to give you an example of how far-reaching Rabbi Elazar of Worms was, Rabbi Elazar of Worms has a Zulas, a piyut that they said by Ein Elokim Zulasecha, by the end of Shema, for Shabbos Parsha Shoftim. What's heißt Shabbos Parsha Shoftim? What happened then? It's a nice parsha, but what happened then? So the answer is that that's during the Shiva de Nechemte, right, between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, the Nechama after from Shabbos Nachamu, and that's when the Haftarah starts on Anochi Hu Menachem, right? The Midrashim, the Rav Zatzal talked about HaKadosh Baruch says, okay, I'm handling it myself. Ani Yasawara, Bnei Yisrael are still tummeling, we want HaKadosh Baruch. Anochi, I'm coming in. So that was a big week of the Shiva de Nechemte, and he has a lengthy piyut, with each one has 4 lines in a stanza. Each one has 5 or 6 words to give it a kind of a rhythm, and each stanza ends with a pasuk which has some form of the word nachem in it. I'll just read you a drop. Ani rishon ani acharon ehyeh imachem bechol tzaraschem ani et rosh esdimchem. Gilu b'Yushalayim u'Tzion ka'es ani arachemchem anochi hu menachemchem. That's the first one, and the other ones go into every imaginable verb form of lenachem, line after line, based all on psukim, based on chazals. Appears in many kisvei yad. That's one kind of an example. He has, by the way, in Yonah Diyoma Slicha v'Tainis Esther, right? Hamin ha'etz ya'alu natzutzim v'na'alolim u'macharta belohon kodesh hilulim zacharta chazdecha v'menuscha b'li yikulim. Right, Haman and his family were after us. Chivisa be'echad be'adar mashmim al hashkalim. So we have Parsha Shkalim, we have all kinds of ways of getting back before Purim, and then Purim itself, of getting back at Haman and his rishos. Again, beautifully done. It's not exactly metered, but there is a certain internal organization of very technical and excellent sense, and you have 50 of these. Perhaps the best known kina, though, is Nebuch Kina that occurred to him. You know, he talks about crises that happened in Worms and crises that happened in other places. He felt in kind tzaras by Eden this time. This is after the Second Crusade. Although the truth is that between the year 1171 Leminyonim and 1196-97, which is 100 years almost to the day after the First Crusade, 1196, there were about 11. I hate to say it this way, but anti-Semitic incidents, tremendous in the Rhineland and in France. Jews were killed, not in the same numbers in the First Crusade, but that doesn't matter. Once you had the First Crusade, even if one more Jew was killed, they went very excited. Jews are killed, they're robbed, they're beaten up, they're hurt, they're you name it. And in 1196, and these events are recorded in the Sefer Zechira of Rabbi Ephraim of Bonn, Bonn, which is in the Rhineland. Rabbi Ephraim knew what was going on in northern France with Rabbeinu Tam. Earlier in the 12th century, the Second Crusade, he has a whole collection of these things. Somebody are still working on it again to try to do the history well. But Elazar's own wife and daughters, Rabbi Elazar of Worms, were killed, God forbid, in front of his eyes. And his wife's name was Dolce, and he has 2 daughters, Balet and Chana, and he has 43 verses of a kina about them. It's alphabetical, and the simanim at the end, Elazar HaKotten, which is always how he signed off, because he was a cotton, but there he is, Ha'aluv v'ha'evyon, the forlorn and the bereft. And there and we have a hakdama to this that he wrote. He says that on Chav Beis Kislev, right, Chanukah time, right, he says, after I, Elazar HaKotten v'ha'oluv, I just finished being Mavasedra, Parshas Vayeshev, right? Doesn't say Shnai Mikveh Chatarga, but I was being Mava Parshas Vayeshev. I was sitting by my table, and 2 marked robbers. He means marked with the cross. They weren't marked with Zorro. They were marked with the cross, right? God forbid. And they took out his wife, the Hasidah, Dolce, and his two daughters, his older daughter and his younger daughter, and they literally, the younger daughter, the older daughter, the younger daughter, they chopped her head apart. They chopped her head off they chopped her head in half with an axe, and they injured his son Yaakov, but he lived. And the other ones were killed. And they injured other people. He had a Malamed who was living in his house, and so on and so forth. And he says that Dolce, when she was mortally wounded, she yelled out, Harguo Sanu, they're killing us. Right? Nishchatim. He says that they beat her up, they beat her in her head, they bashed her head in also. Right? He says they beat her head up to her neck. They crushed her head. I mean, you can get nervous from this, right? But we have to know about it. And her face, and she fell to the floor and she died. And he says they somehow were able to push out. They wanted to kill everybody. They pushed them out of the house at that point, and others came and helped them afterwards. And they caught the person or the persons who did this. And he says, but he killed my wife, or they killed my wife and my two daughters. And he says, I have to write about it. I have to scream about it, right? And he says that he writes what basically is an Eishes Chayil in memory of his Eishes Chayil. And he says there, she's the one who was Mefarnes the family. She supported the family. She brought in money from other. She did business. She prepared the Svarim for the Yeshiva Bachrim. She taught the daughters. Says that she taught them Tehillim, Zizak Tehillim, Zezak Tehillim. And he goes through line by line what she did. He also has a piece on the older daughter and the younger daughter, and at that time, how old was Elazar of Worms? So maybe he was 40 years old, maybe not. He was still a young man. He still lived for another 35 years. So here he's doing all this Torah, Snigle, Nistar, Remez, Tif Halacha, Lomdis. He's doing it all. And all this is happening to him. It reminds us, God forbid, of our own day, of the Nitzolei Shoah and others who went through unbelievable things, and they didn't give in. They did what they could do, and they try to help themselves. By the way, and he says, we fought back. We didn't sit there and go, oy vey. We fought back. We pushed them out. But the learning was what they did to make up. She wanted us to learn, and so we're going to learn over here. And that's exactly what he says. It's a beautiful kina. It's been published many times. You have it already in Xeris Ashkenaz at Tzorfas of Haberman, but it's been published with English translation. People have written about it. It's also, again, not that this is the main point, it's beautifully constructed. It's a beautiful poem. So even that he had. So somehow Hitgaber, and he went on. Many of the works that I mentioned to you that we talked about tonight were written after this Maisa, not before. So that's there are no words. I'll mention one more thing, Mr. Chairman, and you'll ask me questions. So in 1232 Leminyonim, famously, the Ramban writes a letter to Rabboni Tzorfas. The Ramban in Spain writes a letter to the Rabbonim of northern France, where his Rebbeim had learned. He had a lot of their Torah. They were having a fight about the Rambam's, some of his Svarim, not the Halacha, but the Hashkafa, right? Where the Rambam talks about, the nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in sort of philosophical terms, and they're having a whole tumult, is that the way you do it, and so on and so forth. And the Ramban is trying to quiet down this machlokes. There was a cherem, there was a counter cherem. It involves all of Western Europe, northern Spain, southern France, northern France, tumuli. And the Ramban writes to the Rabboni Tzorfas. It doesn't mention any names. And I for one, think he's not talking about real Bali Atosfos. He's talking about other Rabbonim, Rabbonim, people who are getting excited. And the Ramban says, listen, I have an eitzah for you. He says, first of all, the Ram is a godel, and the Ramban defends the Ram. And he says, we here in Spain need his farm. The people need his farm. They're not lamdonim like you are. They need his farm. To the same extent, we need the farm of the Rambam. He says, Mishnah Torah ungenomen. Everybody needs it. Mishnah Torah in Spain, I mean this is a shevach. It was like a kitzur Shulchan Aruch. They all knew it, and that's how they did halacha. He says, Mar Nevuchim is more complicated, but that should be kept for Yechidim. He says, but if you want to help yourselves. I know that you have by you a sefer by Rabbi Elazar of Worms, Sharei Hasod v'Hayichud, right? Again, the secrets of Hashem, the oneness of Hashem. This is what I call Rabbi Elazar of Worms' first level of Sod, first level of Amkus, which talks about that Kavod HaNivrava and Atzal, how to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the problem again is if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite, so how does he appear to Nevi'im? How does he look like a person? How does he do all these things? He says, you folks, I know you Frenchmen have that German book. You have it. Everybody has it. And if you'll read Rabbi Elazar of Worms, that will put you in a good position. I don't know if the Rambam would have liked the Sefer fully, because I don't know if it stemmed with all the things that he thought, but that will get you out of the claim that they believe that God had a body. There's a whole issue here of anthropomorphism. My point for tonight is that Gam Mizeh, Rabbi Elazar of Worms, also Shalom b'Mromov, right? He's helping to make Shalom, right? 1232, I'm not sure if he was alive anymore. But 1232 from Spain, Ramban is telling people, make sure you read Rabbi Elazar Rokeach on Sod HaYichud VeHaEmunah, and you'll have good hashkafas. You'll have the right hashkafas, and everything. We'll be able to solve this whole tumult that was happening. So even there, as a peacemaker, can we say that he's a menachem? He's a tremendous menachem in his kinos. So he's not just as alamdin. He's a chorif and a baki and a balsod and a porush. He's got tshuva and he's got tikunei tshuva. It's not just frumkeit. There's also a tremendous communal dimension. As I mentioned, he signed on the Takon Shum. He was a real man of the people too somehow. So it's hard to imagine how one person could do all of this, but we've just scratched the surface here, Mr. Chairman. So now you have to ask me all your questions, and we'll figure out what we didn't cover. Go ahead.
You mentioned some of his works. There's the Hirschler Siddur, there's this new Siddur that's coming out, there's the Rokeach, I think Zichron Aaron redid some of that stuff, and there's this Pirush on Chumash, the Edinburgh
various Pirushim.
There's other Pirushim on Nach.
I got to stop you. He wrote two things I want to stop. First of all, there is a collection of his Svarim on Sod by Rabbi, you'll have to help me here, Rabbi Eisen. I remember him from the Macholet Tatzumi Kitveyad, a Hasidic Yid, what a fine Yid. Eisen, it's a collection of Svarim of Sod of the Rokeach. You'll have to look for it in your Otsar HaSfarim.
I'll look it up, yeah.
He's a wonderful person, and it's great stuff. It's unbelievable. It's a whole, in 2 volumes, he's got all kinds of things. I think he also, Rabbi Elazar of Worms wrote a Perush to the Medrash Rabbah on Megillas Eicha. What? In other words, Gam Mizelo Hineachas Yadav. Tomorrow we could find 6 other things. It's just so unbelievable.
And that's the point. He was a prolific writer, and there are still things in manuscript, and there are things 100%. That we lost. He wrote. There's many other things that he wrote.
Yes. I scratched the surface. I gave you things here. I told you these big Sifrei Halacha, which I don't know. Again, the Beis Yosef knew the Rokeach. I don't think he knew these others for these other kuntreis and the other kvatzim, but tons and tons of halacha. The Tosfos, the Bava Kama. Go know what other Tosfos he wrote. I don't know. We don't have them.
Is he quoted in Tosfos at all?
I don't think so. Reb Shmuel HaChassid is quoted Yevam Samach Alf and Beis, and Reb Yehuda HaChassid is quoted Ksubis. I have an article in English where I argue that some historionim have created this hafrada, haylachud v'haylachud. I don't believe it. In other words, I think there's a lot more. In other words, you'll say like this. He was a Rosh Hashiva too, but again, he just did so many different things. There's a hadadiyut, there's a mutual putting together, right? Mem tes panim l'Torah, which, by the way, he liked very much. He has an introduction called Sefer HaChochma, where he talks about all the ways you can interpret Psukim and Chumash. That's from him. Not just Pshat, Drash, not just Remez, Sod, Midosh. You can't imagine. About 60 or 80 different, I think 60, 72, all kinds of methods, literally, Shiv Panim Torah.
So what would you say Elazar Rokeach's legacy is? Is it as a Bal Taisis, Bal Soid, Bal Halacha, all of the above, everything?
Yeah, so again, the problem is, in order to appreciate him, you have to read 47 Svarim. Look, he certainly has a legacy. Like I say, the Beis Yosef, I'll say this very gently and carefully, he's a go-to man for the Beis Yosef. The Rokeach, Beis Yosef, people, we've talked about this, Beis Yosef, Kazeh Svaradi Tahor, did he know Ashkenazic stuff? He knew it all. He knows what kind of a resource he is. He has things in Yonei Brachas from Rivak of Spira, not his father, from German Bible that we don't know from any place else. He records that too. So I think his main legacy in Nigla is the Rokeach and the Perushim that we have, Al HaTorah, things that we can attribute. In Nistar, again, we have the Perush on the Siddur is the most accessible, but there are other things that can be read from him. But again, we have to, the Piyutim, also the Piyutim are very, look, the reason he's not quoted so much in Tosas, we've talked about this before, that could be because of the Netek, right? There's a separation between the Lamdanim in France and Germany don't know each other for a while because they're a little bit enclosed. So he lives right in the Tkufa, right? I like to call Reb Simcha Mishpira, who is exactly his contemporary. They may have died in the same year or two. I like to call him the greatest German Baal HaTosas who's never mentioned in Tosas. Tosa Rashi's mentioned. But, so I'm waiting. In other words, the Tosas on Bava Kama go in the middle prokim. Not the beginning and not the end. You're like, it's stupped in. The Shita Mikubetzes has everything, Shita Mikubetzes Bava Kama has the Meiri. He has everything. He knew everything. Rabbi Tzal Ashkenazi had access. We will find more. So again, I also suspect, I don't know how he pulled this off, because he was so modest. You know what? Moshel Lamah Dover Domet reminds me a little bit Reb Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal, right? He knew everything. What Svarim did he write? Svarim that not everybody has access to, Reb Chaim, right? In other words, Reb Chaim's Svarim are for only, superstars, right? In other words, he put out this, he put out that. Why did he write this? You say, why didn't Reb Chaim leave us, 16 Perushim on Shas? It's the same kind of existential question. The answer is, the Anivus is such, right? We're not going, I don't want to, philosophize here, but we're not going to leave you big books with my name on it. I'm going to leave you Piyutim here, Chidushim here, Sod here, Remez here, Nigla there. But when you try to put it all together, you can't hold it all in your arms. You can't hold it in a shopping cart.
Dolce, I think, is very well known, especially for a woman from the Tkufas Baal. We know a lot about her from her husband. Now, descendants, you talked about the two daughters that were killed as well, and then there's a son. The other Rabbi Elazar Rokeach, the Meister Rokeach, the one of Amsterdam in the 17th, 18th centuries, there's a legend that he's the Ben Achben of this Rabbi Elazar Rokeach. Yeah, just to mention another one that maybe people
I haven't seen all the documents, but after, in other words, yeah. By the way, you are right. This is, again, called Kfura Bas Melech Penima. Very few women are, again, they don't write themselves. And somebody will mention his wife, his daughter, his this, his that. She was a Isha Chashuva. But this is really what he describes about her Sai in terms of the Parnasa, but Sai in terms of enabling the learning, and Sai in terms of her own frumkeit. We really have a very full description. That's one of the fullest descriptions. Those historians who like to find the voice of the women, they all run to Dolce because there aren't that many other voices to hear about. So that's also worth looking at. I mean, that's a whole side point. I think one of the daughters was just bas mitzvah, and the other was 6. The whole thing is just, you read it, you cry, you just, but you have to read it, you have to look at it.
Very sad, and it's a snapshot into what life was like, unfortunately, for the Jews at the time.
Yeah, we think everything was green, big lamdonim, they must have had. They were, despite everything being not so green, they were big lamdonim. Listen, again, we're in a, we think we have challenges. It's nothing compared to what they, ishish, but God forbid.
Now, yeah. About his name also, Elazar, the 1557 edition, I'm looking at here, the Rokeach says Eliezer on the Sharblat. So maybe that led to confusion. There was already confusion hundreds of years ago, and that led to this proliferation of mistake.
I told you, I have my theory. I mean, it's a theory. The name Eliezer doesn't chumish. Eliezer Eved Avrom. Where's Elazar? Pinchas ben Elazar, right? But that's so people tend to. It's a natural slip, and then listen. How do you spell Eliezer in English? Okay, how do you spell Elazar in English? 3 different ways, right? So these things get, and for Sofrim, when Sofrim are writing, they're not that they mean to miscopy or they mean to make a boo-boo, but it's a name Hakri at the end of the day. So, but I always say, I went to give a lecture somewhere on the Rokeach, and the flyer said Eliezer I said, well, let me tell you two things. There are two spelling things you can't do. You have to write Elazar, not Eliezer, and you have to write Rokeach unavav, because if you write it with the vav, the gematria doesn't stim.
I think a lot of the Sfarim, you see, I could be wrong. I think a lot of times they write it with the vav, even the Rokeach, but it shouldn't be, like you're saying, it should be without it.
Otherwise it's Rokeach. It doesn't...
Put the... Yeah,
right, what's the name? Rokeach, that's the name of Tzipar, right? Otherwise, it doesn't shtim. If you have a second, this is really the Baal HaTurim, but people say, well, what's with the Rashi Tevis? I mean, unbelievable, backwards, forwards. So I just want to tell you one pasuk in Chumash, which to my mind, even though if I confess this, I'll be in trouble. My great-grandparents were Hasidic Yidden, and they came to America, and I went to be a Litvak. I went with Rav Soloveitchik, so I became a ger, a Hesa Litvak, the worst kind. And my father, Allah Shalom, was very good. He said, whatever the Rav said that you wanted, you do it. That's okay. My father was big on it. He did. And the Rav used to say, Fakir, do what your father does. It was very interesting. Anyway, so... but I'm not such a, again, I've actually taught about Remez, and so, okay. Here's a pasuk in Chumash in the Baal HaTurim. Tell me what you hear about this pasuk. I don't know if we ever discussed this, but it's just worth as a general ha'ara on what we'll call Remez. And Remez min HaTorah minayim. When you hear this, you'll say, hey, wait a second, there must be something to all this stuff. Not short an aleph, add 2, multiply by 3, nothing wild. The pasuk in Emor, the al kol nafshos meis lo yavo, the kohen gadol, right, can't come into contact with any dead people, God forbid, right? Lo aviv ulimo lo yitamo, he can't even be matama to his parents. That's the halacha. Fine. There's something remarkably unusual about this pasuk, remarkably unique. Looks like a pasuk of drushes, but it's a straight pasuk. Say it slowly again. The al kol nafshos meis lo yavo, lo aviv imo lo yitamo. What do you see there? I once saw this between Aliyas and Shul. I almost collapsed. Listen to what the Baal HaTurim says. And again, he's getting this from. This is all coming from the same Ashkenazic source. Every 2 words have the same last letter. The al lamed kol lamed, nafshos saf meis saf, lo yavo aleph aleph. Every 2 words have the same letter. Now the next one is tricky. Lo aviv vav ul imo vav, lo mitan aleph, lo yitamo. So the answer is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah needs to have those Torah codes. You could find Ronald Reagan Lahavdil in the Torah. You could find all the. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. You could find anything. Okay. So the Baal HaTurim notices this. It's a question: what do you do with it? So he says, and the Rokeach does things like this too. There's a gewaldige machlokas tanoim. Machlokas tanoim is always very hard, Hadassah, very hard to figure out how to paskin about whether Ephraim, if I have a body, if you have a dead body with a bone, if it's pochs mikashir, you can't add a half a bone from this Jew and a half a bone from that Jew and say, oh, now it's a shir, I can't be matam. You can't add 2 people, it's a different person. The machlokas tanoim, what about Revius and Dam? Are Revius and Dam mitzdarfos? Can you add them? What the Svar not to is it's 2 different blood types, 2 different people. The Svar yes is Jewish blood, right? Damadidach sumak tfei. You can add the 2 together. Says the Baal HaTurim, for this pasuk we have a Gilui Mills at the pasuk like the shita that says 2 Revius and a mitzdarfen, because it's 2, 2, 2, 2. It's a tough sugya nazir, meaning you take these ramazim. It's not just for fun. It's to teach you some deep halachas, very complex halachas that we can't resolve from other places. I don't know if he means that's exactly how to resolve it, but it's almost anticlimactic. But you look at that phenomenon, nobody can say this remez is, this is for Hasidic Yidden only, this is for some people who, like numbers, math people. No, it's really an amazing, it's part of Gufei Torah.
And this is what he does for those familiar with his Siddur commentary, with Pirush Tefillah, he goes through. It's not only it's not your. That's what he's saying. It's different decide, but it's also remez, a lot of remez, gematria.
Right, 100%. Right. No, and he explains tefillas too, but he connects things based on the Ramazim. Absolutely, it's to show that every word is memuchshav. Every word is thought about. That every word. I mean, what we would expect from Atbayat Tefillah. Every word is crystal, and they go together, and this goes with that. It's quite a interesting thing, yeah.
And to be clear, he said he's a student of Rabbi Chassid, but is the Rokeach, especially on Tefillah and other things, is he like the main German Balasoid that we have, at least that wrote big commentaries like this?
He really is, because Rabbi Chassid didn't write so much more. I mean, Sefer Chassidim, truth is, has things from his father, Reb Shmuel, the beginning part of one of the editions, and there may be things from Rokeach in there too. But that's his main work. There are other things. Again, I say this very gently, he does not appear to have been as prolific an author of Yehuda Chassid as the Rabbi Elazar of Worms. Rabbi Elazar of Worms, Nechbal HaKelim, schreibt. So he is in many ways the Netzig, he not the Netziv, but the Netzig of the Balei HaTosfos, no doubt about it. Yeah.
Now, if someone wants to read about the Rokeach, I know there's a Hebrew small pamphlet from Kamalhar that was written in 100 years, whatever it is. Who wrote about him in English? So I did a little, but there's a book. There's a book on the Machzor of Worms by a woman who's mostly interested in the art stuff, which is just interesting. They just put out a humongous Nuremberg Machzor. So there are things in English on some of the Machzorim. Rabbi Elazar of Worms stars in every Machzor because there's stuff from him everywhere. I'm trying to think here. Auerbach, of course, has him a little bit in Balei HaTosfos. I don't think mostly the people writing about Sod write about him, but that's very hard material to go through. In other words, you have to. I'm trying to think. I have to think some more. We'll have to get back to the Olam. I don't think there's so much in English. I'm sorry to say. Yeah. I'll link your book, and like I said, he comes up in a lot of different areas, but not like there's no bio of him.
By the way, his piyutim are in the intellectual history book in that chapter, and there's a lot of other stuff. You go in the index, there's plenty of stuff. In other words, I think sometimes.
Your book has on every Baltoises. You want to pull that book out?
Yeah, no. So I think. That's what my wife always says. I leave him alone, and he's going through things that nobody heard of, and that's what I do till I figure something out. But Baruch Hashem, Schusi Agdola. But yeah, all right. But that's what we have to try to do. Maybe I'll send you that article on Rabbi Yehuda Chassid and Elazar of Worms in the Balei HaTosfos. That's a nice little. It's a short English article. It's a very interesting.
I can post that on the chat. Yeah, I'll link to your books in the notes, and if I can find the PDF of like a Kamalhar, I can put that also. And if you can get a hold of that new expensive Siddur Rokeach they just did Volume 1, there's a nice intro and this stuff in there about the.
Yeah, I saw it. I don't have it yet, but I did see it. I'm still waiting for that. I'm still waiting for the Kolbo. The Ala Kol. I'm still waiting. Baruch Hashem. So we'll see.
So I'll link to that, what materials I could find, and listen. Perhaps we'll do Appearing Through the Lattices. We'll focus on Sod next time, and if listeners want that, let me know.
The problem with Sod is you have to be quiet about it. But
we'll think of what to do, or if anyone has any ideas, what they like. Email me. Don't bother Rabbi Kanarfogel. Bother me, and I'll bother him.
Well, I'll tell you.
No, they should email you. They should email you any feedback. But if they want any
questions, I answer questions. One of the Mazinim in London, I think. I try to make little jokes sometimes. Some of them are better than others. And I talked about the Rashbam being in Caen, Cannes. I said, yeah, what are film festivals? And he says, excuse me, the film festival is in Cannes, Cannes, which is in southern France. Oh, yeah, the Riviera. So when I try to do popular culture, I flunk. But I try to get the... What's that?
Try to get baseball.
Yeah, well, I try to get the learning right. But baseball is Torah Simecha, Musar Avicha Torah Simecha. But I just cute when I was writing on Period on the Ladder. When I started, the book appeared in 2,000 minyanim. So when I started working on it 10 years before, I don't know. And my oldest daughter, who was about 11 or 10 or something, 12, came to me one night in my study in a different house where we were living. And she said, Abba, I'm very worried. I said, what's the matter, Meitela? She said, I see you have all kinds of things about Kabbalah and Sod and things, and I'm very worried. I said, why are you worried? She said, because you're not 40. And I'm worried something's going to happen. So I said, don't worry, Meitela, I'm not learning it, I'm just looking at it. She was very, she was very troubled what was going to happen. So that's my job. I put it together a little bit. I don't really know it so well, but I put it together a little bit so that people could have a little more knowledge and awareness. That's our job over here.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me for another episode, and thanks to Gluck Plumbing for sponsoring again.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have a meeting over here. We're going to have to, sometimes I get to Lakewood for Chasanas and for Simchas, and we'll have to, the last time I was on Chasan in Lakewood, a different daughter's car didn't work, and came along a young man to fix it in the middle of the night. Turns out he's an anicle of my first Rebbe in Masifta, who was nifta very young. That's a it was like a mamish, a basher tezach. We were sitting there for hours going over because the car went busted by the Chassan in Lakewood, and it was just so I said to my wife, I'll never complain about having to schlep to Lakewood again. It was
you need to come more often to Lakewood. Look at that.
Halavai.
See the Shamaisa.
Halavai, correct. Anyway, thank you very much, and all right, we'll hear from the people what they think. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kol Tov.